The Joe Rogan Experience.
Did you get a chance to look at that Chaos book that I told you about?
Yeah.
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 Tom O'Neill, who is a friend of my good friend Greg Fitzsimmons, wrote an insane book that took him 20 years about Manson and the CIA and LSD. And what did you think about all that?
Well, you've touched on some. I mean, or Tom touched on some really interesting things that. What I liked about his book, and I went through it, I read it, is that he's actually, I think, very honest about the shortcomings, right, of what he ended up doing, right, and the research that he went through, and where he couldn't draw connections. So I give him a lot of credit. I think it's well worth the read, and. You know, it's a hell of just a personal story that it took him this fucking long, right, to make his way through, in a variety of reasons. But
luckily, it's been a tremendous success.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really he sold out almost immediately, and the paperbacks are sold out too. I mean, I think.
Well, look, Manson
reprinting
is a huge draw, right?
It is
it's
also it's a fantastic account of all the things that happened with the Manson family and all those people that were alive back then, about how this guy kept getting out of jail, and they kept arresting him, and they kept saying, this is above my pay grade, and they would let him out.
Yeah, and that's for me, that's the strangest part about the whole story, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this idea that, was Manson, a lab rat for the CIA, and, how far down that rabbit hole do you want to go? Well, O'Neill is pretty clear about that, right? That's not a particularly solid connection. It's a tenuous connection, I think he called it, between one of what used to be a contractor, a researcher for that old chestnut MK Ultra,
Jolly West.
Yeah, Jolly West. Yeah.
What did you think about all that? Like, I'm sure you know about Operation Midnight Climax and all the stuff that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting to know how many people are aware. I mean, I know some people that that's what they do.
Midnight Climax.
Yeah.
Operation Midnight Climax was a CIA-funded program where they dosed up Johns. They created brothels and dosed up Johns with LSD against their knowledge.
Yeah,
and without their knowledge, and let them fornicate and have a good old time with these ladies of the evening.
Man, my God.
And watch them and film them and study them.
I know. When you say it that way, I'm in if you want money to produce that movie. But it's it is actually, it's true. Look, it fell under the sort of umbrella of this MK Ultra, which is public knowledge. I'm not, obviously we're not talking out of turn.
Well, let's also give them the benefit of the doubt. When LSD was synthesized by Albert Hoffman, they really needed to figure out what the fuck this was. And they need to figure out, like, could this be used against Americans? Could this be used against the president? Like, what is this? Is this a truth serum? Like, what are the benefits? What's the pros and cons? And what are the dangers of this stuff?
Well,
and
that's
from a national security angle, it's very important that they did study it.
Right. And so from context, and again, we talked about that towards the beginning, is which is something we don't normally do, right? So we're judging people from history now and so we're not using context of, well, what was the atmosphere? What were the conditions?
We're talking about the 1950s, the 1960s.
Well, late 40s even.
Right.
I mean, so what have you got? You got the end of the World War II. You got the Cold War. It's the late 40s. You've got the Soviet Union that is heavily invested in a variety of experiments. Mind control, brainwashing was the sort of the term of the culture, right? And brainwashing was a big issue. Not a big issue, but it captured people's imagination back then. So the late 40s, early 50s, it was the Korean War. We had an existential threat, right? We had nukes pointed at each other. We had drills in schools, kids hiding under desks. I mean, what the fuck? So with the fear that the Chinese or the Soviets were going to develop mind control abilities was pervasive. And I know, you talk about it now and everybody rolls their eyes and goes, oh my God. But you're absolutely right that you have to understand the context with which then Allen Dulles, who was at the time the director of the CIA.
By the way, the guy who Kennedy fired.
Yes.
And wound up being a part of the Warren Commission after Kennedy was murdered, which was very strange.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Go ahead, keep going.
Oh, I like that. I like where that could go. So, So anyway, we got Alan Dulles, who in '53, early in '53, says, "All right, we have to understand what the Soviets are doing, particularly the Soviets. But we also had, again, I'm sure some folks listening know all this, but a lot of folks probably don't. We had POWs returning, American POWs returning from Korea. That was a big issue, right? Because some of them came back, again, quote unquote, brainwashed, and some of them didn't want to return because, again, brainwashing, mind control that, perhaps the Chinese had developed these techniques. So initially the idea was defensive. How do we protect ourselves against this new threat within this Cold War, against these enemies who appear to be devoting a great deal of resources against this? Well, so initially it started out as a defensive effort. MK Ultra was the umbrella name for a whole bunch, over 140 projects, sub-projects underneath MK Ultra. And it was all based around chemical substances, use of chemicals, use of drugs, behavioral issues with human beings, creating false memories, deleting memory, influencing the behavior, again, of individuals. There were a variety of projects that fell under this MK Ultra, and it was, again, starting out as a defensive issue, but then quickly became sort of an offense. How do we become the leader in all of this, which is typical, right? It's typical in how things develop. It's like cyber warfare. Initially it's defensive, and now you think, okay, now we got to figure out how to make it work on our behalf.
And sometimes it's important, like when they shut down the Iran nuclear program with a virus, essentially a computer virus.
No, absolutely. And where this went off the rails in a handful of ways, in many ways, was testing on unwitting subjects. Things such as LSD and a variety of other substances. Yeah, whoops. And those subjects, unwitting subjects, ranged everything from in federal prisons to state mental hospitals.
And that's where Manson comes in.
And that's where Manson comes in, and a variety of other people, who. I would recommend people, dig in. Don't settle on just one account. And one of the things that people should also do if they want to read about this is read any testimony that came out of the CIA. And there was some testimony. There were documents written